My name's Penelope Reynolds, I'm 29, and I'm seated at the far end of a long table in a crowded private dining room. The room smells like citrus and roasted garlic, glasses clink, and a low murmur covers sharp whispers. Ava, my older sister, rises with a microphone and sneers that I'm too poor and embarrassing for her elite circle. Laughter sparks around her, the kind that asks permission to be cruel. I do not flinch. My chair is angled toward the room's screens, my face lit clean for every camera. No one knows why I chose this seat, this bouquet, this silence. The takedown is already aligned to the last syllable of her insult. I'm the only one who knows it. Before I tell you how I turned that insult into a public reversal, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Subscribe and switch on notifications for more family revenge stories. The next twist may feel unthinkable until you hear it. In our house, worth was a ladder and someone was always holding it. Mom praised charm the way other people praised art. Dad praised visible wins as if they were the only thing that proved you mattered. Ava, my older sister, stood at the top and I was told to hold the ladder steady. Compliments were rationed like something you had to earn in public. I earned silence for doing the hard work no one saw. Holidays were performances with roles assigned. Ava dazzled in a dress and conversations flowed to her like applause, while I reset chairs, refilled plates, and wiped crumbs from the corners of the table. If I asked for time or attention, they told me I was strong enough to do without, as if I was courting independence rather than asking for a person to look up from their wine. So I learned to read rooms and predict moods because being prepared was safer than being seen. The family story said Ava was the star and I was the scaffolding that should not show. I learned early that the ladder was precious, that my job was to steady it and not to climb. Ava learned to love the parts of power that feel weightless. She learned that status could be fed by small public cuts, the kind that look like jokes until the sting is already in your throat. Whispers became currency, a timed aside, a laugh that invited others to pile on, a casual version of cruelty she could call a joke if anyone protested. Friends were an audience more than a support system. She invited their laughter like a chorus and learned to listen for the sound that meant doors would open. She loved velvet ropes and members-only lists the way other people love novels. She liked rooms where someone had to stand outside while she went in, where she could point at the entry and say who belonged. Mom and Dad mistook applause for character and confused hosting with caring. That gave Ava the confidence to reward people who echoed her and to freeze out anyone who asked for fairness. She liked the soft power of making someone feel small in a crowd because it let her feel larger without doing much work. Over time, her casual cruelties became habits. They were rehearsed gestures that arrived on cue and landed with the neatness of a chef plating dessert. The audience learned to expect it, and she learned to expect the audience. I learned to disappear the way other people learn to breathe. I found safety in quiet and made usefulness my shield. I did favors, solved problems, and stayed out of pictures until people forgot I had been there. The work I did was invisible by design. That invisibility felt like control because I could move things into place without ever competing for the spotlight. Being overlooked hurt, but it also taught me where power often hides, inside preparation, inside the small, unglamorous tasks that make a room work. I kept records because memory turns slippery fast when you're not framed in photographs. Receipts, emails, timestamps became a private ledger of my presence. I trained myself to speak last and watch first. Listening became an advantage because you learn the shape of a plan before anyone admits to it. Disappearing was not weakness, it was accumulating a quiet account of influence. While Ava burned energy on being seen, I saved it. I learned to hold my face steady when jokes landed and to keep my hands calm when people assumed I would clean up the aftermath. It felt like armor and it felt like strategy. My first big hurt was not a fight. It was being erased. The earliest cut that mattered was a school project where I built the model, wrote the research, and stitched the presentation together, and Ava walked into the classroom smiling and collected praise as if she had been leading the whole time. She said later she had guided me and I was told to be a good sport. That pattern repeated, my effort passed off as someone else's shine, and the room rewarded whoever could make the gesture that looked like leadership. It was not the lack of money that hurt, it was that my presence could be voted off the page by a laugh or a headline. I stopped asking to be seen and started placing my work where it couldn't be stolen. I learned to make the evidence so public it couldn't be rewritten. The wound became a map. I promised myself that one day the stage would be mine and the lights would be honest. I wanted not only to be noticed, but to change the rules that let people disappear without consequence. The promise hardened into a plan. If erasure was an unpaid debt, then I would find a way to make the ledger balance in plain sight. What I couldn't let keep happening was the way her jokes became tickets. They got stamped and opened invisible doors while I stood in the line holding the credit. A selfie with my name as a caption told me everything I already knew. The stage was her business and the audience would always prefer her version. So I let that last joke land and then I started placing the next pieces. I cleaned the anger into work because honest anger makes poor witness and dulls the strategy. I called Leela Shah, my closest friend, and told her to save everything, screenshots, timestamps, the work of catching a pattern. Layla, my closest friend, did exactly that. She archived it, labeled it, and promised she wouldn't breathe a word about my plan. The last straw was a small thing that proved the rest. It was proof that the performance would repeat and that repetition would keep erasing me unless I changed the room itself. I chose a public stage because Ava's currency is an audience and consequences must arrive where she spends them. In private, she can write the story she wants. She can blame intent, stammer an apology, and move on. In public, the tape is stubborn. People remember what they saw, not what someone later says they meant. The restaurant dinner was perfect, friends who orbit status, parents who love to be seen, and the club gatekeepers Ava craved. If I wanted to change how she used people, I had to move the rules of the rooms she used. I did not want to humiliate, I wanted to make it undeniable that her behavior had a cost where it mattered most to her. Visibility flips the ledger. If the harm begins in the light, the repair must be in the same light. I wanted witnesses who couldn't plausibly forget or gaslight the moment into softness. I wanted people who had laughed to remember their laughter as the room changed around them. I wanted Mom and Dad to hear the same words the crowd heard and feel the weight they had refused to feel when they told me to let things be. The goal was not personal vengeance, it was structural change. If status rests on erasing people, change the structure that rewards erasure. So I chose a stage she owned and I moved the definitions of who could enter it. The confirmation came in a voice memo, raw and careless. I was half-dressed for a meeting when my phone buzzed. Tasha Nguyen, one of Ava's image-conscious friends, had sent a video of a speakerphone call where Ava was laughing with a group and saying she planned to cut me loose at her birthday. Hearing her say it like a rehearsal line made my muscles go still in a way that felt clean. I saved the clip, checked the timestamp, and wrote evidence across my notes. I did not text back or call. Confrontation in that moment would have been predictable and would have let her rearrange the scene. Instead, I called Leela and asked her to make copies of everything, screenshots, the video, the time. Leela, my closest friend, met me at a cafe that afternoon with a small folder and a thermos of coffee. She slid the phone across the table, her face steady. We whispered about wording and witnesses like two people working on a play, except this time the script wouldn't let her ad-lib cruelty. I called Mom and Dad afterward because I wanted them to hear it from me first, not the trending versions that would follow a public moment. Mom sighed and told me to be gracious. Dad said I should keep the peace and not make a scene. Their caution confirmed what I already suspected. In private, they would voice the same tired scripts that kept me small. Their advice was the risk assessment I needed. If those closest to me trained themselves to smooth things out, the public had to be the place where smoothing was not an option. The betrayal was confirmed not only by Ava's words, but also by the family reflex that turned my hurt into a call for silence. That reflex made the plan necessary. Buying the gate, not the ticket, felt like something out of a different life. I had a quiet exit from my technology venture months earlier. It was the kind of exit that leaves your bank account tidy and your public profile modest. I moved funds into a discreet family trust and used a neutral holding entity to acquire a controlling stake in the hospitality group that owned the restaurant and the club Ava worshipped. The purchase was legal, papered, and intentionally anonymous to the public. I met Martin Cho, the general manager, in a kitchen hallway late on a Tuesday and told him I cared about staff dignity and discretion. Martin Cho, the general manager, shook my hand and asked questions that showed he understood how rooms can be weaponized. I also spoke with Victor Lane, the chair of the board, over coffee and explained that my interest was structural. Better training, better wages, better rules. Victor Lane, the chair of the board, listened like someone who had seen clubs rise and fall on a single scandal. We agreed that a place that protected its people would be more valuable than one that protected its elites. Ownership remained confidential on purpose. Managers knew, staff did not. The hospitality group's teams received new funding for training and a mandate to prioritize dignity. I found allies in unexpected places. The head chef, who hated watching servers put up with rude guests, the owner of a small events company who had seen what a single night could do to a reputation. I kept my public profile low on purpose. I walked into the party with a supermarket bouquet and a cracked phone screen because a reveal works best when it surprises the people who count on assumptions. Buying the gate meant I could change who decided who belonged without shouting about it. I could move the rule book behind the velvet rope and then, when the time came, open it to show how the room had been governed all along. The conduct policy was a document written from the perspective of dignity, not punishment. I worked with Gordon Hale, the corporate attorney, to craft language that was precise and enforceable. No public humiliation of immediate family in our venues. Violations trigger immediate suspension of invitations and sponsorships pending review. Enforcement will be respectful and documented. Gordon Hale, corporate attorney, marked up drafts like someone used to translating behavior into consequence. I presented the policy to the board with Victor Lane, the chair of the board, and he pushed for a clause that allowed immediate review when an offense occurred in one of our spaces. We included training modules, a reporting hotline for staff, and a public-facing commitment to protecting dignity. The policy was not about policing conversations. It was about setting a public standard for how people treat one another where we host them. We scheduled the board vote for the afternoon of Ava's dinner, and Gordon uploaded the signed documents with a timestamp. We rehearsed the enforcement protocol with Omar Delgado, the head of security, so the team would act with calm and not theatrically. Omar Delgado, head of security, practiced wording that would be firm but not shaming. The policy was a tool, not a weapon, designed to stop a pattern of behavior that our staff had watched for years. Its timing was surgical, effective the day it was signed, with authority to act immediately when an incident met the criteria. That timing was the hinge. The clause about public demeaning of immediate family was the blade behind the velvet rope, clean, precise, and ready. I spoke quietly to the host, the manager, and to the lead server, treating them like equals because that is how I had arranged the stakes. I offered a compliment to the pastry chef in a hallway, asked about his daughter's piano lessons, and made a point of thanking the coat check person by name. Every small kindness was a deposit in an account I planned to withdraw from later. I did not wear perfume that announced me. I wore a smell that lingered like a thought. My posture was deliberately open in the beginning, like someone who belongs and won't be surprised. That made the later stillness more precise. When people assumed I was the quiet one who kept house and heart, they missed the ledger I kept in folders and timestamps. Masking my means was not humiliation. It was theater, nothing flashy, nothing cruel, only a costume worn to make the finale impossible to misread. I let them think I was small so that when the room changed, the motion would be obvious and not the result of some anonymous wind. I built the witness grid like an architect planning sightlines. I sat down with Martin Cho, the general manager, and mapped the cameras and screens to catch every face during speeches. Martin Cho, the general manager, understood how a room can be framed for truth. He suggested angles, and where the MC should stand so my face would be visible whether the MC spoke softly or loudly. I asked for seating charts that placed mom and dad within earshot but not in the middle of the noise. I wanted them close enough to see the words land and far enough that they wouldn't be physically trapped by the action. I asked that certain friends, the ones who record everything, be seated where their phones would capture an unobstructed view. Grace Whittaker, the master of ceremonies, practiced her pivot lines with me. Grace Whittaker, the master of ceremonies, carried herself like someone who could switch tone without losing rhythm. She knew how to make an audience lean in without making them panic. I told her to keep the script smooth and to pause only when I gave the smallest nod. Serena Patel, our public relations consultant, mapped the message like a chess player, choosing words that would land for the public and for the people in the room. Serena Patel, our public relations consultant, built the press release that would follow so the narrative outside matched the narrative inside. We placed friends who were reliable and truthful where they couldn't be accused of bias later. I coordinated with the kitchen, too. Chef Lucia Marino, the head chef, agreed to prepare a staff toast that could be brought forward if the event pivoted. Chef Lucia Marino, the head chef, told me she wanted her team scene first if we shifted the celebration. We rehearsed the cue with Omar Delgado, the head of security, who practiced the polite language he would use should enforcement be necessary. Omar Delgado, the head of security, and his team ran through roles so the approach would be respectful and not theatrical. The grid was not just cameras and screens, it was a network of people who would stand in witness and act with integrity when the time came. Timing the announcement was one of those quiet jobs that requires nerves frayed tight and then smoothed. We booked the expansion reveal as a surprise, wording left intentionally vague so Ava would assume the /special guest / mention in the MC's note was for her. Grace Whittaker, who had agreed to pivot, and I rehearsed the moment where she would shift from birthday tribute to breaking news. The cue was a small nod, almost imperceptible, that said go. The lights would soften, the screens would change to the club crest, and the MC would place the name in the room like a new fact. I practiced that nod until it felt like a reflex. It would be the only thing I gave away. To everyone else it would look like a toast, a polite transition. To me it would be the hinge. The MC's script included the announcement that thanked our new principal benefactor, Miss Penelope Reynolds and then moved into the conduct policy reading. We wrote the script to avoid melodrama. Serena Patel, our public relations consultant, insisted on measured language because the fewer the fireworks, the clearer the turn. If the reveal happened like a stunt, it could be dismissed as a dramatic flourish. If it happened like a change of rules, it would be catalogued as governance. We rehearsed the breath of the room, too. I practiced the insult landing and the small lift of my glass as a private signal, and I practiced saying nothing while the world did its worst. I rehearsed the precise exhale after the announcement, the one that would let me reach for the microphone calmly. Timing was not about speed, it was about being the point where two clocks met, Ava's performance clock and the board's governance clock. When they chimed together, the sound would be unmistakable. The legal and logistics work was the part where paperwork met people. Gordon Hale, the corporate attorney, sat with Victor Lane, the chair of the board, and me while we finalized the conduct clause. Gordon Hale, corporate attorney, made sure each clause had teeth and each enforcement path had a witness trail. The signed documents were time-stamped and uploaded to the internal portal the afternoon of the dinner. We sealed ownership documents in a folder that Martin Cho kept in the manager's office safe, just where an audit would find them. Martin Cho, the general manager, carried the sealed folder like a private fact. Omar Delgado, the head of security, received the enforcement protocol and practiced it with calm phrases. We need to step aside and review this under our policy. Not accusatory, not loud. We set up a reporting line for staff so that servers who witnessed anything could alert management quietly. We prepared receipts of funding for the staff training programs and made sure the head chef was ready to pivot the service to a staff toast if the event changed. Chef Lucia Marino, the head chef, agreed to box the birthday cake for donation if needed. I did not want waste to be part of the scene. Every person had a script and a role, nothing depended on improvisation. Emotional discipline cost me in ways I did not expect. I rehearsed my breathing until a small inhale and exhale became tools I could use under pressure. Mindfulness helped, but it was practice and grit more than anything spiritual. I accepted that Mom and Dad might call me afterward and ask why I had not told them. I accepted that they might tell me I had gone too far. I accepted the lonely weight of choosing consequences over quiet reconciliation. I let myself grieve the version of family I wanted, the version where Mom defends you in the room and Dad refuses to let someone speak for both of you. That grief was its own fuel. It made the plan sober and serious instead of vengeful. I practiced saying nothing when people expected me to react. I rehearsed the paragraph I would give if called for comment, a short thank you to staff and a reminder about dignity. I let go of the idea that everyone would understand. Some people would see my move as cruel, others would see it as overdue. I slept badly in the week before the event and called Leela at odd hours to steady myself. Leela, my closest friend, listened with patience and then reminded me to breathe, to remember why I had built the room the way I had. The cost was real, relationships shifted, and there is a loneliness to wielding power privately. But discipline meant I wouldn't be the kind of person who retaliated loudly and without cause. I traded a small field of quiet friendships for the possibility of lasting change. That trade felt in the end like the only honest thing to do. Mom notices me first in that soft way she has when she's trying not to make a scene. She says I look tired and reaches for my elbow. Dad squeezes my shoulder and tells me it will be a nice night. They say it quietly, as though we agreed long ago to pretend nothing rattles us. I keep my smile small and steady. I greet servers by name because I bought their respect weeks ago when I asked for honesty in how they'd be treated, and the head server nods like someone who has been told what to expect. People drift in. The friends who orbit Ava's life check each other for approval, clink glasses, and pose with practiced laughter. Their eyes slide past me the way people skim a menu they're not ordering from. I sit at the far end of the long table where the screens are angled toward me. I set my phone face down and let it be a small lie they can believe. I fold my hands on the linen, listen to the room breathe, and feel the little shifts. A laugh held too long, a chair scooted in, the exact moment when someone decides on a side with their posture. I place my water glass where the light catches the rim. It's a tiny, deliberate thing, an anchor on a table where stories get told and retold. The bouquet smells faintly of grocery store roses, and that smell becomes part of the costume. I don't need people to pity me, I need them to assume the thing I want them to assume. I watch the screens and make sure my face will be seen with no flinch. The night feels like a held breath and I'm keeping it steady. Ava moves through the room like she owns the air. She's polished in a way that reads as effortless, hair arranged, laughter timed, the kind of smile that tells everyone they should enjoy themselves because she has already arranged the evening's moral economy. She takes the microphone with a tilt of her chin and says the first warm things, the easy jokes that pull a room to her rhythm. The crowd settles into her cadence. You could feel how practiced the pattern was, how she invited the witticisms that edged toward cruel. She spins charm like a coin and tosses a few small, sharp remarks like confetti. It's a performance where the applause validates the cruelty. Her friends laugh in the spots she wants them to laugh, the kind of laughter that gives her permission to go further. She dances around personal details with the grace of someone who knows exactly where to cut. She finds the part of a person you can make fun of without being called mean. The room obliges because it's easier than looking for the person she's folding into the joke. Then she turns to me with a smile that has been practiced in a mirror. That smile is all blade, no light. She says I'm too poor and embarrassing for her circle and that she can't waste her time with me anymore. The words are clean and sharp in the acoustics, and they land the way a verdict lands in a courtroom that only gives out social sentences. Laughter follows like a wave, and some of it's that permission to be cruel kind that asks everyone else to clap along. Someone near me records the moment, phone's angle like surveillance. The sound in the room changes and I feel the exact shape of the cut in the air. I do not move. I let the sentence sit inside the room like cold silver. My breathing stays small and even. I lift my glass as if to drink and nothing else. It's strange how loud silence can be when people expect a breakdown. Some guests look away, others angle their faces toward the insult like vultures to a fresh thing. I watch Ava's smile falter for the fraction of a second it takes her to look for the applause she bought. I keep my hands where anyone watching can see them, calm, not clenched. I let the insult complete itself. The legalism of the moment, the policy I had drafted, needed the act in the open to have the clarity we had planned for. The room had to recognize what happened without argument, so I gave it the full sentence and the full air it needed. When she finishes, a few people laugh out of habit, some wince, and most keep their faces toward her. I hold my breath and then exhale slowly, an invisible signal. I do not call her out, I do not cry, I do not speak. I let the moment become a thing that can be witnessed in total, because later that witness will matter more than any private conversation. Mom reaches across and does not touch me. She folds her hand into her lap like someone balancing two truths. Her face has the open confusion of someone who loves both daughters and is trying to weigh a single sentence into a whole life. Dad shifts in his chair like someone searching for an old instruction manual. He opens his mouth as if to say my name, to ask me to step away from the edge. I give him the smallest shake of my head, just once, because we had already discussed this in the quiet of preparation. I don't want him to speak because his voice could turn a decision into a memory that absolves. Their reactions are quiet film. Mom's fingers touch her necklace and she looks down as if she is rearranging something invisible. Dad's jaw tightens, and for a moment I see him weighing the cost of standing up against the cost of keeping the peace. He looks at me and then at Ava, measuring the household rules that have always guided our family. I can see the old scripts moving across his face, the phrases he learned about not making a scene, about preserving appearances. I accept their discomfort because it confirms why I had to choose this stage. If they had stood and defended me in that breath, the structural lesson would have been lost. If they had called me aside and asked me to let it go, the pattern would continue. So I sit still and let them process. Their silence is a kind of witness, too less dramatic but meaningful. We had rehearsed this. I had told them indirectly that I wouldn't be the person to let the line blur again. In the quiet exchange with their body language, I see that they are beginning, at least, to feel the weight of a moment they had previously smoothed over with the phrase, "It's just sibling teasing." Around us, the crowd shifts like weather. Friends who had laughed first now glance at their phones, and a few tuck them away, as if the moment has changed how they want to be seen. The table becomes a small theater where people are choosing sides with their utensils. The manager, the MC, and several board members who are in the room check their cues and watch with hidden relief. Our plan needed them to hold steady. The air tastes like lemon and the crispness of linen, and someone coughs as if to clear the stage. Conversation returns in small, cautious bursts. People test the edges of what happened with jokes that try to recenter the room. A few guests shift seats, rearrange themselves physically, like people moving chairs to change an argument's acoustics. Phones continue to record, but the angle has changed. The cameras are no longer just watching Ava, they are watching the room react. I feel the invisible field of attention tilt toward me, not because I demanded it, but because the architecture of the evening did. The laughter that followed Ava's cutting line thins and becomes a smaller thing, less confident, more self-aware. People who had leaned into cruelty now search for the polite thing to say. Someone leans in with a whispered apology meant for a neighbor more than for me. A hand reaches across to squeeze another's forearm in an attempt at comfort. The dynamic is shifting. The loudest voices are quieter now, and the people who had been looking for status markers are studying their own plates. The room has to decide in small gestures whether it will return to the old script or step into the new one we placed on its table. I let it decide while I sit like a hinge, steady and unreadable, watching how the crowd rearranges itself when the rules move. I watched Grace Whittaker, the master of ceremonies, shift her posture and let the line glide from birthday banter into announcement. Her voice carried differently when she moved from casual to official, and that was all it took. The cue was not a shout, it was a mechanical hinge we'd set. I kept my face still, because faces give people cues and I did not want to hand mine away. My palms were open on the table so that anyone watching could see there was no tension to hide. A server passed my elbow, and I felt the small bolt of warmth that comes when someone knows their work mattered to the plan. The room inhaled as one organism and then exhaled at Grace's next words. I noticed the exact moment the murmurs shifted from social noise to attention. An intake at the back table, the clink of a fork stopped mid-swipe, the flash of a phone screen as someone started to record the pivot. Time condensed into the space between syllables. That little nod had become a hinge not just for me, but for the whole room, an invisible contract that would allow rules to change without anyone alleging trickery. It was surgical, and it landed with the quiet authority we had engineered. The screens filled with images curated to tell a different story. Projects I had funded, training classes, smiling staff in uniforms I'd helped underwrite. Then the MC said my name plainly, and for a beat the room held its breath as if the announcement were a new kind of weather. When Grace Whittaker, the master of ceremonies, thanked our new principal benefactor, Miss Penelope Reynolds, the sound of the room altered in a way I had planned for. There was a flicker of applause, some of it reflexive, some of it tentative, but what followed was more telling. People looked at the screens again, where photos of initiatives and staff development played in a slow loop, and then they looked at me in a new light. Martin Cho, the general manager, stepped forward in a way that made the backstage visible. He came to the head of the table and shook my hand as if acknowledging a new fact. Martin Cho, the general manager, did not look surprised. His face was composed like someone who had been told to do a particular job and was now doing it. A few guests clapped out of habit, then out of understanding, because the narrative the screens offered made sense next to the live room. Ava's smile, for the first time that evening, stuttered. She searched for a calculation in her eyes and found arithmetic she had not expected, numbers and governance that did not care for charm. The MC's language was steady and precise, which was part of the point. She first acknowledged the financial backing, the work that had enabled training programs and staff development, making it clear this was not a social stunt but a sustained commitment. The announcement included the detail that my liquidity came from a technology exit, phrased simply so that the room could translate it into consequence without obsessing over figures. Then the pivot came as we had written it. The MC read aloud the new conduct policy's headline and summarized the clause about public demeaning of immediate family inside our venues. It was important that the policy be read as governance, not theatrical punishment. The wording said that violations would trigger immediate review of invitations and sponsorships, and that enforcement would be documented and handled with respect. Saying it out loud made it legal sounding in the room, even though the legal work had already been done. Spoken words make rules real in a way that documents alone do not. The MC noted that the policy took effect that day and that the board supported immediate review for any incident occurring in our spaces. The two-part reveal, money and standard, fit together like a lock and key. One opens the door, the other decides who gets to stay inside. The enforcement was calm and procedural because we had insisted on a humane approach. Omar Delgado, the head of security, moved with the soft efficiency we had practiced. He did not shout or handle anyone roughly. Omar Delgado, the head of security, approached Ava and asked if she would step aside while the management team reviewed the situation. His voice was measured and respectful, the kind of tone that keeps dignity present even as it applies consequence. The board chair in the room nodded, and Gordon Hale, the corporate attorney, checked his watch and made a note of the time, small acts that recorded the moment with administrative clarity. The manager explained that under the new policy, public demeaning of immediate family warranted an immediate review, and that sponsorships could be suspended pending outcome. Ava protested with the reflex of someone who had always been able to recover by reshaping the story. It was a joke, she said. She hadn't meant it, her friends laughed. But the policy did not hinge on intent. It hinged on public behavior. That was the principle we had chosen. The MC read the clause again in a neutral tone. The enforcement team offered Ava a private conversation and a chance to present context which would be considered, but the immediate step was to pause her sponsorship and review the invitation list. The action was not theatrical, it was administrative, which made it harder to dismiss as a personal vendetta. It was governance doing its job in real time. The restaurant's rhythm changed. Service slowed politely, plates were cleared with an efficiency that felt like editing, and the anniversary band in the corner lowered its volume. For Ava, the party became a birthday that wouldn't continue as planned. The manager announced, quietly but clearly, that the private dining room would be closed for the scheduled party. The event would end so staff could prepare the terrace for a different celebration. Staff members who had been waiting on tables shifted from private party service to a new order. They were asked to come forward and be the first guests on the reopened terrace. I asked that they be invited to accept the first toast because the night was never intended to be about spectacle. It was about the people who did the work. The cake that had been baked for Ava was boxed and set aside for donation. I did not want a punitive tableau with smashed confections. Waste felt like a poor echo of the lesson. The music that had swelled to accompany Ava's entrance moved into something softer, a background that allowed conversation rather than performance. Servers who had been on edge all evening relaxed into the relief of being seen and thanked. Their faces mattered in the small way that changes a room's temperature. People who had been there for status made subtle calculations about whether to stay and watch or to leave quietly. A few guests came over to offer apologies, others gathered their coats, choosing their exits with a new care. We shifted the celebration to the terrace and invited staff forward to toast. The manager raised a glass to the team, not to me, which was fitting because the policy and the funding were meant to lift them, not to build my image. People watched as a different kind of party opened. One that prioritized dignity, that gave servers the front row, that made the staff the first beneficiaries of whatever money and rules had produced. It was intentional and small, the kind of thing that rewrites social equations without a loud, triumphant speech. The birthday that wasn't became a moment of recalibration. The room's center of gravity moved, and you could see it in the way people stepped, some toward the terrace, some away, all rearranging themselves to fit new boundaries. Business people at the far end of the table, parents who had nodded politely at Ava's jokes, now opened their wallets differently, not at my table exactly, but in their posture. Denise Carter, a longtime family acquaintance, who values reputation and had been quick to encourage Ava's social moves in the past, sat very still as if recalibrating the ledger of who was respectable in her mind. Harold Carter, Denise's husband, cleared his throat and then simply looked toward me with a softness that had not been there before. The subtle shifts were the kind that become citations in future conversations. People would recall the room when making decisions about invitations and partnerships. Business cards, which had been a source of minor courtship earlier in the night, started to be offered to me instead of Ava. People who had come to mine the evening for gossip now made small depositions of respect. A handshake, the tilt of a head, a question about staff training. The social currency that had been easy for Ava to mint, introducing people, making rooms, suddenly required a different minting process. Some tried to restructure their footprints quickly. They sent an apologetic text that read like a script. A few did not bother at all and left. The difference mattered. The room's center of gravity had shifted, and that shift would ripple outward into invitations, intros, and the quiet decisions people make when they choose who to include. I took the microphone because power that is effective does not announce itself grandly. It offers a small, clear direction and then steps back. I thanked the staff first, not because it sounded good, but because they were the ones who deserved the evening's attention. I spoke slowly, my voice measured the way a person uses a tool they do not want to break. I said that dignity was not extravagant. It was the baseline of how we treat one another in rooms we host, and that the team here had earned more than applause. I did not name names. The policy, the cameras, the board had done that work. I asked guests to tip generously and to remember that a quiet act of respect often does more than an overheard complaint. Then I did something I had planned for weeks. I invited the servers to the terrace first. Martin Cho, the general manager who had coordinated the staff movement, smiled and began calling the team forward by name. Chef Lucia Marino, the head chef who had agreed to box the cake rather than let it become part of a punishment scene, nodded toward the staff. The servers came up with an openness that made the room breathe easier. People clapped for them in a way that felt honest, not performative. I asked the crowd to join me in thanking them with more than words, tips, job referrals, attention. My language was not triumphant, it was practical. If we wanted different rooms, we had to fund different behaviors. Taking the mic felt like closing a loop. I did not gloat or bask, the moment did not need more heat. I reminded people softly that policies without enforcement are just paper, and that enforcement without compassion is cruelty. Then I offered the mic back to the MC and stepped aside. The room needed to continue, but it needed a new center. The servers' smiles, the steady clapping, the look on Martin's face when he realized the staff would be the first guests of the terrace celebration, that is what mattered. I listened to the applause like someone cataloging evidence, not trophies. Sitting back down felt different this time. The far seat that had once felt like exile now felt like a station of control. I thought about the supermarket bouquet on the table and how small it looked against the table's centerpieces. That was the point. What looked like modesty had been choice, and the choice had to be visible to be meaningful. The opening insult, which I had let land, had become the hinge for a plan that was measured and precise. People will always try to tell stories that flatter them, but a room with cameras and a sign policy is less hospitable to polished untruths. I replayed the evening in small mental frames, Ava at the mic, the cameras panning to my face, the board chair who had sat through his notes and then nodded at the right line. The trap had been placed months before, an acquisition signed in quiet, policy written in measured language, allies cultivated in corridors. That precision was not malice, it was a refusal to be erased. I had chosen the choreography so that the consequence wouldn't feel like revenge but like an institution correcting itself. I kept my breathing steady as I watched people rearrange themselves. The glare of the cameras was not a triumph. It was proof. Proof matters to people who had learned to be invisible. The immediate fallout for Ava arrived in small social retractions that accumulated into something heavier than one angry night. Invitations she would normally receive with the ease of habit started to pause at the edges. Event coordinators who used to text her directly now CC'd others. Her phone began to ring with calls that went to voicemail. She texted frantic threads that were answered with polite delay. Julian Price, her boyfriend, who had always benefited from her social momentum, tried to manage the message with hand-wringing and a few poorly timed defenses that read as panic. The club suspended sponsorships and her access was placed under review. That administrative action translated into social consequences because the rooms she valued began to close their doors, or at least to ask more questions at them. Ava's first instinct was familiar. She framed herself as the victim of an unfair public spectacle, then leaned into a narrative that made her friends defensive. She posted a controlled statement that called the reveal a misunderstanding and cast the night as an unfortunate misstep. But the video, which had been captured by phones across the room, told the cleaner story. The tape showed the insult in context, the laughter, the pause, and the immediate pivot to the policy. In that way, the record refused the rescindment of facts. People could see what she had done without relying on her explanation the way they had in a private conversation. The social fallout had shadings. Some friends dropped away fast, not because they were cruel, but because they were calculating reputational cost. Others reached out with apologies that read as both genuine and cautious. A few tried to be neutral and then realized neutrality looked a lot like complicity. The text threads that had once been ablaze with party plans cooled. The same people who used to call her for last-minute guest lists now hesitated. The lesson was immediate. When the rules of entrance change, the market for charm shrinks. Ava felt that contraction most acutely because her brand had been built inside rooms whose rules had been unchallenged. The social circle began to reprogram itself in front of me. People who had thrived by following Ava's cues looked for new cues. Some asked me, cautiously at first, what my standards were and how they could be a part of spaces that valued dignity. A couple who hosted many fundraisers approached me after the event and asked if I would speak to their committee about staff training and respectful rooms. It was an odd validation, an invitation to do what I had already done quietly in the background. I accepted, but I set ground rules for what I would discuss: concrete training, funding for wages, and transparent policies. Others tried the swift rebrand, public apologies on social media, repositioning of past photos with added captions that sounded repentant. Those gestures were useful for a moment but less durable than real change. A few people I had once trusted as friends slipped away entirely. Their absence was the price of realignment. I did not pretend it did not hurt, it did. But I recognized the difference between people who stayed because they truly wanted to change and those who stayed because changing was easier than leaving. The former I kept close, the latter I let move toward their own new scripts. In the end, the room center moved in ways both quiet and seismic. Invitations were reconsidered, sponsorship lists were reevaluated, people began asking about the restaurant's policies before booking. The social currency of cruelty deflated a little, replaced by something less showy, the economy of people who keep their promises. That was the recalibration I had aimed for. It felt practical and unfinished, like a rule that had just been written and would be enforced by small, steady acts from then on. Dad called later, his voice rougher, the kind that carries instructions even when he's trying to be soft. He asked if we could meet in person and talk it through. At the cafe, he kept glancing at his watch as if timing his own learning. He said he had always wanted the family to look good in public, and that sometimes that meant he smoothed edges he should have left raw. He asked me how he could make it right. I told him I wanted him to listen in the room when I spoke, not to edit me into a story that made the family comfortable again. He flinched, but he nodded. It was a small, honest promise. We made rules that were almost boring. No jokes at dinner that rely on someone else's shame. No public put-downs allowed to be laughed off as teasing, private grievances to be handled privately with respect. They were simple but specific, the kind of rules that keep things from sliding back into old patterns. Mom asked if I would come to family events, and I said yes under terms. Appearances where I felt safe, where there was a plan to keep things civil. Dad said he'd speak up if he heard any cutting lines. They have their habits, they will slip, but they also have a new awareness that keeps them honest. Saying that I'm their daughter and also not their cleanup crew was harder than I expected. They are learning that keeping peace has sometimes meant keeping me quiet. That truth stung, but it also opened space for real repair. We are rebuilding with guardrails, small, clear promises that make it harder for anyone to pretend a hurt never happened. It's work, messy and slow, and I do not expect perfection. I do expect them to try. The business outcomes surprised even me in their steadiness. Staff retention improved because people felt seen and protected. Servers who had been planning to leave sent messages about how the training and the wage bump mattered. Reviews started to mention kindness in the same breath as flavor, which felt like an odd and welcome compliment. The club's waitlist grew in a way that had nothing to do with exclusivity and everything to do with people wanting to belong somewhere that had rules they could count on. Meeting planners began to call to ask about our conduct policy before booking, which meant the standard we set had become a selling point. We launched a leadership program that promoted promising servers into supervisory roles with real responsibilities and a transparent path to management. It wasn't charity, it was investment, mentorship, clear pay bands, and training that taught people how to move from service to leadership. The kitchen got funding for better equipment and a scholarship fund for the chef's apprentices. When the public relations pieces ran, they did not spin the evening as a scandal but as a recalibration, a business deciding what it valued and funding those values. That framing changed conversations with partners. Some introductions came as cautious inquiries, others came because people wanted to align with an organization that matched their own standards. Money did what it was supposed to do, it created resources, but the quieter result was cultural. Teams stayed longer, morale rose, and the restaurant's reputation shifted from a place where you were entertained to a place where you were respected. That is a different kind of brand, and it's more sustainable. I watched the slow accrual of small wins, fewer incidents reported, better tips, more employees applying to be on the leadership track, and felt privately that the leverage I had used was being turned into something with staying power. Setting personal boundaries felt like an act of maintenance I should have done earlier. I limited contact with Ava until she could speak without an audience as armor. I stopped attending events I knew were setups for someone's performance at the expense of someone else. I invested time in friendships that were reciprocal, people who asked how I was and meant it, not people who were waiting for the next currency of social yield. Forgiveness became a private thing and not a demand I put on anyone else. I could forgive later if change happened, but I wouldn't set myself on a path of constant rewriting for the sake of other people's reputations. I made practical rules. Text replies that could wait, visits that happened on my terms, and events I attended with clear escape routes. I told myself that protecting my peace was not selfish, it was a strategy for sustainability. Being kind did not mean being available for harm. I started small, declined an invitation framed as /just fun/ where I knew old scripts would repeat. I said no to photo ops that made me feel like a prop. Those little refusals accumulated into a life that required less armor. there is a strange dignity in not gloating. I did not send a triumphant message to Ava, nor did I publish the records of the board's vote for the sake of display. The policy had done the speaking for me. Precision is kinder than chaos, it administers consequences without spectacle. I kept my voice low in public statements and high in gratitude for the staff who were the true heroes of that night. I reminded myself that control feels different from domination. Control is orderly, not cruel, and it closes doors quietly but firmly. I did not replay the incident like a highlight reel. I remembered breathing patterns, the way the lights softened, the tiny nod that started the pivot. I made lists of people to thank rather than people to shame. When offers came, speaking invitations, interviews, I chose ones where the goal was to teach and share, not to exact further retribution. My public statements emphasized standards and dignity rather than revenge. That restraint kept the story from becoming a vendetta and turned it instead into institutional change. It felt like stewardship. I did not warn them because warnings had never worked. In private, Ava could charm a room into forgiving with a laugh, and our parents could smooth over a moment with a phrase that made the hurt evaporate. When you warn someone who has structural advantage, the warning becomes a performance they can absorb and neutralize. I had seen that pattern play out for years. A private admonition would have been filed away as an awkward family anecdote, and the next party would have been the next stage for the same behavior. Public harm needed public repair. If the audience was part of the harm, if their laughter and silence had been complicit, then they had to be part of the repair. Some lessons only land when the people who enable them are present to witness the consequence. I wanted the change to be undeniably in the room where the harm had been done, not an abstract policy tucked away in a memo. That is why the timing mattered. It was not spite, it was accountability. Also, warnings create an opportunity for rehearsed apologies. Ava could have altered her words, practiced a mea culpa, and insisted she'd learned her lesson. That sort of performance might have placated some and erased the real work that needed doing. I wanted governance to bite where performance couldn't. The policy and its enforcement were tools that made the consequence immediate and factual, not a matter of who shouted politics louder. Finally, I wanted the repair to be about making rooms safer for those who do the work of keeping them running, the servers, the cooks, the coat check people who do not have the luxury of staging a comeback. A warning changes nothing for them, a policy does. That was the clearest reason of all. People who had built their social capital on performance were suddenly forced to translate charm into commitments. They had to decide whether they wanted to keep the old currency of laughs or earn the new currency of consistent behavior. That choice matters because the new currency compounds. When staff feel safe and guests respect standards, the place becomes a kind of magnet for people who value steady, honorable interactions. Visibility becomes a tool for accountability when it's paired with structure. If you only chase the spotlight, people will remember the sparkle. If you pair the spotlight with rules, people will remember the frame. I learned that the frame matters more. When you change the room's architecture, you change what counts as success. That is how you rewrite status. You make visibility mean reliability, not performance. That is the lesson I wanted the room to learn. That being known is different from being used, and that public memory can be a shield for those who have been made small. Power, when it's quiet, feels like being steady inside a storm. It's not fireworks or loud declarations. It's the calm of knowing what the levers are and which buttons to leave untouched. In the weeks after the dinner, I felt that steadiness settle into me like a new habit. I could walk into a room and notice where decisions were being made rather than exult in the fact that I'd made them. Quiet power looks like preparation, folders in order, people briefed, empathy practiced. It's the ability to let someone else take the applause because you know the outcome is secured. Quiet power is also less about control and more about removing unnecessary variables. It's choosing when to step between someone and harm and choosing when to let policy do the heavy lifting. It's the small, measured choices, the call to the manager at 2 in the afternoon to confirm the conduct policy had been uploaded, the text to Leela telling her to be ready to share timestamps that make dramatic moments reliable rather than reckless. There is a moral ease to this. You do not have to prove yourself to everyone because your work is documented and your standards are known. That ease is surprisingly tender. I noticed I slept better because I had a plan for what would happen if people behaved badly. Quiet power allowed me to be more present with the people who mattered to me instead of being trapped in an ongoing private defense. It's a kind of authority built of preparation and decency, and it's more sustainable than the thrill of a single victory. Money opens doors, precision decides which doors stay open. I had the liquidity that let me buy a stake in a hospitality group, and money made certain logistics possible: funding for training, a governance structure, and the credibility to make changes stick. But the moment that mattered was not the number in a bank account. It was the exact language in the conduct policy, the timing of the board vote, the way the announcement was framed. Money bought access, precision bought consequence. If I had only shown up with a big check and no rules, the evening might have been a spectacle, a story that people would scold themselves about and then forget. If I had tried to humiliate Ava publicly without legal grounding, I would have looked like a sore sister rather than an institutional actor. Precision turned a private grievance into a public correction that was hard to dismiss. It made the action feel like governance, not vengeance, and that shift changed how people interpreted everything that followed. Precision has moral weight. It requires you to think about outcomes, not just optics. I could have made noise and felt better for a night, but instead I chose to create structures that improved lives long after the room emptied. That is where the real return on investment came, in staff who stayed, in managers who treated people better, and in an institution that had clearer boundaries for behavior. Money made the plan possible, precision made it just. If you're hearing this because someone in your family uses cruelty as social currency, know that public spectacle is not the only answer, but neither is private pleading always effective. First, gather proof quietly and safely. Screenshots, recordings, notes with dates. Evidence helps you see patterns instead of isolated incidents. Second, find allies who care about the places where the harm happens, the boss, the manager, the friend who keeps records. Those allies can help you change the structure, whether it's a household rule or a workplace policy. Third, build standards you can enforce. A rule without follow-through is only decoration. You do not need to escalate to the highest possible lever. Sometimes a clear conversation with a manager or a recorded message to a family member is enough. But if the abuse repeats and is always performed where others will laugh, consider moving the conversation into a place where witnesses matter. Public harm needs public repair, but that repair can be administered with care, not cruelty. Plan for dignity, not drama. Use discipline and help from people who will act with integrity. And remember to protect your peace. You're not required to be present at every stage drop. If you must act, be deliberate. Don't let rage write your plan. If you can, redirect resources to those who do the work: staff, siblings, friends who are undervalued. That is a practical way to turn a hurt into a structural gain. It's not petty, it's productive. I sleep better now, finally, and the relief is small and consistent. Nights used to be a loop of old humiliations replayed until I woke and had to remind myself of the plan. Now my dreams are quieter: small breakfasts with Mom, Dad asking me about a book I like, Leela laughing at something mundane. Those dreams are less about victory and more about ordinary life. I check my inbox and there are fewer urgent threads about social damage and more notes about staff development or a chef asking how the new scholarship fund should be administered. That kind of inbox is a balm. I keep a list of people to thank, names of servers, the pastry chef who boxed a cake for donation, Martin Cho for his steadiness. Gratitude is a practice I adopted deliberately to replace the appetite for revenge. I visit mom and dad more often. Our conversations are thinner on performance and heavier on small, true things like recipes and doctor appointments. My relationship with Ava is a slow work in progress. I have boundaries and accept that healing may never be symmetrical, but that is okay. I protected my life from being a stage for other people's ambitions. I no longer replay the insult to fuel anger. Instead, I recall the exact sequence of my breath before the cue, the soft click when the screens changed, the quiet way the manager invited staff forward. Those are the images I hold. They remind me that the most important work was not taking a microphone to announce a downfall, but creating a room where dignity matters more than audience approval. That gives me a peace that is not triumphal but durable. If a story like this lives in your family, share it in the comments so someone else feels less alone. Subscribe, switch on notifications, and stay for the next chapter. More true, strategic endings are coming.